Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to our last day of our BCThubs conference. This morning's session is on scientific diving and maritime archaeological research, status and prospects. I would like also to give you many wishes for this important day of St. Nicholas Day, which is the protector of mariners. And I would like to express all my best wishes for a successful last day conference. I would like to invite our colleague, Alexis Tourtas, a postdoctoral fellow research on the University of Asia, who will give us a keynote speech with a very interesting and provocative title, Dive and Bring Me That Pot, Scientific Diving and Underwater Archaeology. Alexander, good morning.
Good morning. Let me start by, of course, thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity to take part in this very interesting scientific meeting about integration of innovative technologies in the challenging endeavor of managing underwater cultural heritage. In the past couple of days, we heard a lot about many fascinating underwater archaeological projects, whether they were focusing on traditional research questions or were striving to push the frontier to new regions of thought and practice. I think that nowadays it's becoming more and more evident that underwater cultural heritage is not just the sites and the finds. Rather, it incorporates a vast array of intangible features, and it's not just about archaeology, rather it engages multiple scientific fields and brings together the scientific community with the local society and the wider public. Moving from traditional archaeology and cultural management into the modern scientific landscape, we're urged to emphasize that procedures matter, theory matters. We need to be able to answer not only the question, what is that, whether we're talking about an archaeological find or a new impressive smartphone application, but also to be able to explain why this is important and how we reach that conclusion or develop that new tool. In the end of the day, that is what distinguishes science from anything else. Elon Musk, for example, might be a successful business figure, but he's not a scientist. He's not interested in sharing the method rather than selling the product. Likewise, someone who is interested in uncovering a piece of ancient art, either for financial profit or just for fame, is most likely closer to a treasure hunter than an archaeologist. Luckily for us, archaeological theory has provided, in the last few decades, has provided us with a lot of cognitive tools to understand the framework in which one performs the archaeological act. There are many approaches that fluctuate between well-structured interpretation systems to more flexible and complicated schemes of understanding the past. And the same can be said about maritime archaeology. Although underwater archaeology started as one of the most practice-based subdisciplines of archaeology, I'm happy to say that we made up for lost time. And we have here too a decent body of theoretical work on the nature of maritime cultural landscapes, the study, and their management as cultural assets. So most of you are familiar with the particularities that underwater archaeological research entails. However, let us all just take a step back and look at the big picture as it is nowadays formed, taking into account the magnitude of a dynamic and globally developed subdiscipline, as well as the complexity of modern-day scientific networks. First of all, as clearly shown during this conference, there is much more to underwater cultural heritage than hardcore archaeological research. Managing UCH comprises also ways of handling the archaeological material and its physical environment in terms of natural and cultural heritage protection, as well as providing access and interaction to the public. All of those levels of management require diving, as well as the use of innovative technologies, and have their own separate scientific theory and methodology. Taking a closer look at underwater archaeology, again, there are multiple ways to access and study the underwater archaeological record. But I think we can all agree that the main two types of field underwater archaeological investigations are a survey that locates and documents sites of archaeological interest, and an excavation that focuses on the study of a particular site. And even if we have to acknowledge that modern technology is slowly replacing divers in various situations of the former, possibly in a few years the latter as well, there is still the need to visit the sites, either for identification or excavation and recovery. But let us be clear about one thing. Diving is just part of the process, an integral one, of course, but it's not the only one or the most important. All the steps need to be equally developed. And I think many of you will agree that there have been people, especially in the past, who used archaeology as an excuse to go diving, which is good for diving, but at the same time is an unhealthy scientific motivation. We can definitely confront this predicament through citizen science, but we'll have the chance to talk about this later. So who are the divers involved in an underwater archaeological project? Well, we obviously need the archaeologists, yet modern day multidisciplinary research calls also for conservators, biologists, topographers, geologists, and other scientists, as well as technicians, illustrators, photographers, media experts, heavy duty workers, underwater machinery operators, and the list goes on and on. So people from different professional backgrounds. And another thing that may also vary is the diving level, which in many cases moves from open water diver to trimix and closed-circuit repeater diver. This motley crew needs to be sorted out, needs to be evaluated, and the people in it are called to work together to provide a valid scientific outcome. But how do we do that? Well, the best way seems to be the formation of a certain scientific diving framework that assigns roles, identifies tasks, and organizes them in an effective way. For example, one of the most obvious steps towards that direction is to identify the nature of tasks at hand. Excavating, taking samples, conservating in situ, are scientific jobs and need to be carried out either by or under the close supervision of a scientist. On the contrary, setting up the airlift dredger, moving a cement block, or recovering heavy objects to the surface are clearly technical tasks that are potentially dangerous and need to be performed by a trained commercial diver. Another example of assigning roles. The principal investigator, in our case, the archaeologist, has the duty of setting the research questions, deciding the proper methodological tools, and supervise the scientific integrity of the procedures. The duration of the dives, the proper gas, the necessary diving equipment, and the needs and merits of every individual diver of the team are the responsibility of the diving safety officer. These two roles should be clearly defined, and the opinion of the person that holds them should have the necessary gravity on relevant matters. I'm not saying all those things because people don't know them. Many of you are trained divers and have experience in underwater archaeological projects. However, I'm afraid that on many occasions these procedures are being seriously neglected. People sleep, sometimes consciously, either due to practical impediments or due to an obsolete and misguided tough guy philosophy, and sometimes unconsciously due to the lack of theoretical knowledge. I mean, they don't actually understand the importance of those procedures. I strongly believe that a well-structured scientific diving framework will safeguard our community on both occasions. A few years back, I was fortunate to work on an EU-funded research project called Science Diver through the University of Thessaloniki. The project's ultimate goal was to promote the creation of a commonly accepted European scientific diving framework that would also align with other schemes, such as the American Academy of Underwater Sciences, the Australian Diver Accreditation Scheme, or the British Health and Safety Executive. Up to that point, various groups like CIMAS or the European Scientific Diving Panel, the ESD, have been trying to set up such frameworks and have provided us with valuable standards, but their impact had not been spread beyond a certain institutional level, probably because that's what they were aiming for. When I joined the project, I was skeptical, and quite frank, I was not very optimistic. The scientific diving landscape was, and still is up to a point, seriously fragmented due to regional and theoretical differences. The gamut spans from rigid commercial diving schemes to more flexible yet less effective frameworks depending on the needs of a certain part of the world or a specific scientific field. And collaboration between the existing entities was minimal. However, during the project, we had the opportunity to study most of those schemes and converse with people who were actively involved in them from all over the world. Leading figures from AAUS, CIMAS, HSC, GUE, and the European Underwater Federation, and other bodies talked to us. And it became apparent that the will for finding common ground was already there. We like to think that our project gave this necessary little nudge in order for things to move forward. But even if that's not the case, we're very happy that Dr. Dimitriou from the University of Thessaloniki, a valuable member of our team, was invited to sit in during the discussions about the creation of ISO standards for scientific diving training. And contrary to my pessimism, the ISO standards are here. They were published in April this year and comprise 3 levels of scientific diving training that cover a wide array of topics related to scientific diving. I'm not going into details, but I'm going to point out a thing or two about the potential use of those standards. Most of the things I'm about to say stand for any set of standards, but the fact that the ISO standards are more or less globally accepted and they become automatically European standards makes their impact quite substantial. The fact that we have standards means that we have a common threshold, a threshold of commonly accepted values, definitions, prerequisites, quantifiable experience indices, and other tools to work with in a common language. The standards are the base on which we can build training programs. That is the main purpose of this particular standards. However, we can use them as a way to formulate the corresponding occupational framework as well. Right now, the standards are purely about education, but as I said, they can be used to push for an international occupational framework. The standards can also be used as a starting point of, or as a guide for the development of operational regulations and procedures. And here's another thing. A big part of the conversation regarding the formation of the ISO standards was dedicated to the potential threat against scientists' professional rights from non-scientists that will be trained as scientific divers. My personal opinion can be summarized by John Duggan's famous quote from 1960. It is far easier to teach diving to an archaeologist than an archaeologist to a diver. You cannot squeeze years of bachelor, master's, and PhD studies into a 2-week diving course, not even a 6-month course. But you can definitely take your sweet time and probably train an archaeologist in how to be an adequate scientific diver. However, Guggen's next sentence is equally important. He says, the sports diver with an archaeological inclination cannot be ignored. Of course, this phase is how he expresses his fear about potential looting of the archaeological sites for recreational divers. But this interest posed by recreational divers can be turned into a good thing. In the last few decades, the concept of citizen science is gaining ground within various academic disciplines, and we have many successful examples, even in underwater archaeology, like the Nautical Archaeological Society in the UK. Clearly defining the scope and the principles of citizen science diving programs means that we can not only distinguish it from professional scientific diving, but also engage more people into the scientific process, creating a symbiotic relationship. Of course, the rules of this coexistence need to be firmly defined, but the concept has merit. The most prominent path towards change, especially if we're talking about changing the paradigm, comes through education. The cultivation of basic principles about scientific diving in students/future scientists is probably the best way to go. I mean, the example of recreational diving is right there and is actually pretty helpful. The standardization of learning and practicing recreational diving on a global scale allowed not only the financial growth of the industry, which is a tangible, pretty commonly accepted fact, but also allowed better communication of fellow divers, facilitated mobility, and yielded a vertical increase in safety. I'm pretty confident that we can achieve similar results if we create a stable and commonly accepted scientific diving educational system. We need universities and research institutions to step up and take a leading role in this effort. The recreational diving community can support this, commercial diving agents can surely advise, but scientific diving training requires the scientific integrity that only accredited organizations can provide. I have encountered people that sold me plastic cards with titles like underwater archaeology diver, underwater archaeology trainer. I'm afraid those things mean nothing at this point, science-wise at least. They could if they were to become part of a standardized citizen science scheme that would take its place next to the professional scientific diving framework. In any case, the ISO standards clearly state that all training programs shall be conducted under the auspices of an organization implementing a scientific diving program. When it comes to scientific diving, there is one thing to be said with certainty. The train has just left the station. Things are happening much faster now, and procedures engage more and more people on a global scale. One can either hop on or be left back to obsolescence. Countries that have chosen the tough commercial diving path are already considering ways to collaborate with less rigid scientific diving frameworks. At least they accept the possibility to set the ISO standards as a common threshold in order to receive divers outside their educational and occupational scheme. Countries that have unstable or fragmented frameworks can use the ISO standards to solidify it. And countries like Greece that do not have a stable scientific diving framework should definitely strive to create one. It is, in my humble opinion, very frustrating for our professional identity to lack such a framework. We are not recreational divers, we're not welders, we're not scuba instructors, and we're not Navy SEALs. We are scientists and we should demand to be treated as such. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean, of course, that we are better than everybody else. I'm just saying that we need the right methodological tools and the right occupational and legal framework to perform our job safely and effectively. In order to obtain this right, though, we need to get properly trained and to follow the scientific diving standards. It is a pity to throw away this right, and it's definitely counterproductive to either reject or neglect safety and scientific standards, because then it becomes dangerous not only to our professional status, but also to our lives. I will conclude using another quote. This one from the late 50s is from Benoit. He said, "The excavation of an underwater site is not about fishing for amphora. Since the early attempts in the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, underwater archaeology has developed into a modern, technologically driven science that incorporates a vast array of methodological tools, has its own body of theory, a set of ethics and social sensitivities, and reaches out to the public through creative and innovative interactions. We cannot treat it anymore as merely a fun and adventurous way to bring pods to the surface. It is not a sport, it's an important scientific diving operation." Thank you.